to use Nuke. Here I have a file set up, and I'm working with some images that were provided to me by Tim McElhenney. So let's go ahead and start with just kind of showing you guys what this interface is and what the different areas are. So up here we have our default viewer. So that's just going to be the image output that's going to feed into the preview. So it's essentially just showing us what's currently selected. And this is actually a node. And well, let's come back to this in a second. Over here we have properties. So whenever we click on a node or click on an image or anything like that, its properties show up here. I want to clear them out right here. You can always bring them back by just double clicking on any node. And so this is where we're going to change the settings, or we're going to find our images, etc., etc. Okay, and down here, of course, is our workspace. This is going to be where we are connecting nodes together in order to get them to, adjust our image to make them prettier, or make fixes that we want that we couldn't do in lighting, or to combine together our images. Like if we made one image and rendered it out in Houdini, and the other one we rendered on a farm through Maya. And RenderMan, then we would want to composite them together. So we would combine them together and down in this workspace. So first, let's go ahead and talk about the two basic nodes. The first node I'm going to talk about is the viewer. And this is always in your scene by default. This is going to be a node that comes in, and when you start the file, there's going to be nothing else but the viewer node. And the viewer node is just going to, whatever you connect to this, is going to show up up here in this viewer. Right? So you can see viewer 1, viewer 1. So I'm just taking a look at these different nodes and what their outputs are. Okay. And then the other basic node that we're going to worry about is the read node. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this up here, up to these nodes. So I have right here with me a couple of read nodes. And in order to add in a new node, what you have to do is you have to press tab on your keyboard. And that will bring up essentially a finder very similar to what you would find in Hypershade in Maya or inside of Houdini. So this is context. So you press tab, and what it's going to do is you just start typing in the name of the node. All the nodes can normally be found up here, but over the years I've almost never looked up here. I've almost always used this finder. So if we press tab, if we want to bring in an image, we're going to type in read. Right there. It also has a default hotkey of pressing R. If you press R, it's going to go ahead and open up the read node, and it's going to ask you where to find the image. So I've already loaded them in, but I'll go ahead and load in one right now. So you can see I borrowed them from Tim. I have a beauty layer, so you can see it says right here, beauty, an image, a light groups image, so that has all the light groups that were created inside of RenderMan. And then separate AOVs that aren't necessarily light groups related. And then we also have crypto mats, which we'll show too. So if I went ahead and grabbed the beauty, right, the beauty layer, and then if I connect the viewer to this, then you can see this should look like what my beauty image should look like inside of RenderMan. So that when you run the render, the image tool render, IPR, and you see the image pop up in image tool, this should be similar to what it looks like. If it isn't, then that could be a color space issue. So what we're going to do is we're just going to double check some color space stuff, because that might be something that's relevant to you. And we're not going to get super deep into it, but I just want to make sure I covered enough that if you're working in ASYS, you're not going to run into this problem. So if you look at your beauty render and it looks much different than what is in like your output of your renderer when you're working inside your 3D package, then there's likely a color space issue going on. So I've already corrected in this file, but in order to bring up your color space information, you come over here and you can press S on your keyboard. You can also go to Edit, Settings, Project Settings. So that's going to be our project settings. So in our project settings, we can describe a number of things like the frame range that we're working with, like how many frames we have, frames per second, and then right here, full size format. This one's pretty useful. This one is going to be the default for all your nodes. So it's useful to set it here where if you know how large your images are, so let's say 1920 by 1080, it's a really good idea to go ahead and set that here in your project settings so that any new like node that you create that's like image based, so let's say you put in like a gradient, it's going to reformat that gradient to be the right size instead of being an incorrect size. So by default it'll be something like root format, and if you hadn't set it already, it's going to be something like maybe 2K or something like that. As when you bring in a read node, this right here should be the one that down here, the one that's unnamed. If it's going to grab the resolution of one of your read nodes. Okay. So, anyways, that's not why we're here. We're going to come over to this color tab, and by default, it should look something like this: Nuke and then Nuke default. Okay. Yours might look a lot lighter. In this case, mine looks darker. There's some other stuff I've been doing that's been screwing this around. But anyways, let's see. Also on here, it's going to. Let me go ahead and just recreate this read node. So I'll do read, and I'm going to go ahead and find that beauty layer again, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at it. Okay. Oh, I guess it's my viewer. Okay. Anyways, I'm not going to get too much into it. I would have to like debug this. You can see down here that it should look a lot lighter, and that's usually what's going to happen if you're rendering in ASYS, but you don't set up ASYS inside of your project space. So if you are in this situation, if you're not in this situation and you're not rendering ASYS, you usually don't have to change anything in the color, but if you are, what I'd like to do is come up here, we want to change the color management to OCIO, and then we're going to want to change our working space to, our OCIO configuration to ASYS 1.2. And so that's going to go ahead and assume ASYS CG, and it's going to assume all the images I bring in. It's going to make that conversion for me. Okay, and so once it looks right, I'm going to go ahead and close out that project settings, and we're going to come back over here. You probably noticed that I'm previewing nodes without actually connecting them, and that's by pressing a number on my keyboard. So if you select a node and you press a number on your keyboard, it's going to connect that node there, and it'll have a little number associated with it. So if I select this one here and press, let's go ahead and this one I'm going to press 1. Over here I'm going to press 2. So what that means is you can actually toggle back and forth between different nodes really quickly to compare them by pressing the numbers associated with them. So if you can see I had pressed 2 when I had this one selected and brought this one connected. So if I came over here and pressed 2, right now this one is attached to 2. If I select it, then it goes to 1. So if you have a node selected and you press a number, it's going to associate or connect that node to the viewer and make that number the hotkey for looking at that current node. Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and delete those. So now let's go ahead and get back into looking at these images. So I have my beauty layer, right? So that's going to be my default image that the renderer outputs, but usually most of the time we're not going to be actually working with the beauty layer. It's really good to bring it in because we want to kind of compare and make sure that, you know, when I start adding all my images together, they look correct and they look like my beauty layer. But for the most part, in my case, I'm not going to be using this. So I actually have this like really small demo over here, and this is using the light groups read. So over here, I'm going to go ahead and bring my viewer over here just so we can kind of keep that thought in our mind consistent. So right here, I put a read node down, and I went ahead and selected my light groups. So I had an output that was light groups, has all my light group passes in it. And let's go ahead and rename it. I'm just going to double click on this node and rename this light groups, just so I remember. All right, and so if I look at this one, you'll notice that unlike the beauty layer, I can't see anything. There's nothing in here, right? And that's not the case. This is an EXR, OpenEXR file. An EXR file is an image format that's going to actually store multiple images. So it actually is a single image file, but inside that image file has a bunch of different images stored on different layers or channels. They're called channels. So if I come over here, let's go back up to this viewport. Up here in the viewer, you'll see in the top left, I have RGBA. That's telling me what I'm currently looking at in this image. It's telling me what channels it's outputting. So right now it's outputting the RGBA. And that makes sense with the beauty layer, right? Because the beauty layer, when I export that image out as an EXR, what it does is it takes my color information from my render and puts it in the red, green, blue, and alpha channel, right? So red, green, blue goes into, or the beauty image goes into, oops, the beauty image goes into the red, green, blue, and then the alpha output goes into alpha, right? So that's in the beauty layer. But other AOVs might not do that, right? They might not actually put anything in the red, green, blue, and alpha channel. So if I look at this, there's currently nothing inside the red, green, blue, and alpha channel. You can see this little red pixel. If I hold Control and click and drag, let's go ahead and select this one. So if you can hold Control and click and drag, you can see down here it's going to tell you wherever I have something, that little color picker at. So when I hold Control and click and drag, it's doing a color picker. And you can see there's like a little swatch that shows you what the color is. It's going to give you the color number. So this is from 0 to 1. And it's going to also give you alpha. This last one's alpha. So you can see in this scene, there's almost everything that's like three-dimensional and solid is going to have a 1 alpha. There's some stuff in the background that, like through this window, that there's like some stuff you can see through. And that's stuff that's partially hidden. So I can put stuff behind it and you'll see it inside the scene. But for the most part, this is our color checker. So anyways, I'll come over here and you'll see there's nothing here. So that just means there's literally nothing in our red, green, and blue and alpha channel coming from this image right here. So if we want to look at the other channels, we can click on this little drop down and we can look at the other channels. So we don't see anything in alpha. Let me go ahead and look over here. So this is the alpha of this original image. I'm going to go ahead and go back to RGBA. Right? If I just want to look at just the alpha channel, you can see when I was color selecting earlier, we're getting that there's that like weird transparency right here on that window. And it's showing me in the viewport as a color. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so if I hold Control and drag, you can see now that 0.66553 is now in the red channel. If I looked at this as RGBA, you can see 0.6653 is in the alpha channel. Don't worry, don't like bang your head against the wall too much trying to wrap your head around this. The main thing to keep in mind is that up here we can see and look at the different channels. So if I come over here, you can see that's the beauty fill light. So this is just the fill light, the light group that was assigned inside the renderer to be a light group. Here's the fire environment light. Here is the hand fill light. It's very dark. And here is the smoke fire light. And here is the sky sunlight. Cool. So those are all separate images stored into this one file, which is really cool. Makes sharing and transporting images much easier. So in order to get them out though, because we're going to go back to, we're going to try to, in the end, we're only going to look at red, green, blue, and alpha information. So I need to get those images out of there and so I can work with them, right? Because we want to look at them, we want to combine them together, we want to play around with them, just like we can see the beauty channel. So in order to do that, what we're going to use is what's called a shuffle node. And I'm going to go ahead and delete these two, and delete this node too. And what I'm going to do is we're going to view this, and I'm going to press Tab to bring up the context browser. And I'm going to go ahead and find shuffle. So we're going to look for shuffle right here. So this node, the shuffle node, what it does is it takes a channel inside here, or an image inside here, and it brings it out into the red, green, blue, and alpha. Okay, you can bring it into something else. It doesn't have to be red, green, blue, alpha, but for our purposes, that's what we're doing. We just want to bring one of these images out so we can see it in the colors information. So in here, you can see it's just outputting the red, green, blue, alpha channel into the red, green, blue, alpha. So here's the input. So this is the information that's in here, right? And this is the output. This is the information that's coming out and going into the viewer. Okay. So this is what's coming in, and over here is what's coming out and going into the viewer. Cool. So if I want to bring the beauty fill, actually let's do the sun because that's so much more easy to look at. We're going to bring the sun information. I'm going to output that out as red, green, blue information. So I bring that out. I'm looking at the shuffle node, right? So I'm actually looking at just this shuffle node, and I'm looking at the red, green, blue, alpha information of this shuffle node. And I can see one of those images. So I'm actually pulling one of those images out of this file right here, and I'm now looking at it. Okay? So let's go ahead and do that with another one of these light groups inside here that are stored inside the EXR that we can't see. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and grab that. Go right there. So we're just dragging this, and now this is the input into the shuffle node. And we're going to go ahead and look at it. And so for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get maybe that fire environment's light. So now we're taking that light, that image that's stored inside this file, and we're pulling it out so we can look at it by itself. Okay? So if I look at this one, we got our environment key, and I'm going to press 2 on my keyboard so I can toggle back and forth between these, right? So I have my fire light, and then I have my sunlight. Okay? So now I got them both out. Now what do I do with them? So usually what we're going to do with our light groups is we're going to want to merge them together. So we're going to want to add them together so they stack up and they start to make our beauty image, right? We want to kind of make this image using all those different images in there. Okay. So what I'm going to do is use a merge node. A merge node is how we essentially layer, combine, and composite images together. The term that you would normally use, or the technical term for this, is compositing. This is taking image information and combining them together to be a new image. Okay. If you use Photoshop, this is kind of like using the layer system. It's like having one image on top of another image. We can combine them together, we can mask them, we can do all kinds of things. Substance Painter, same exact concept, right? Using a layering system. Any program essentially that has image layers, this is what merge node does. Okay. So I'm going to take one of these images as the first input and one of these other images as the second input. Let's take a look at this. I'll press 3 on my keyboard, so we're looking at this one, and press 3 to look at this. So you can see, if I press 1, I'm looking at this node. If I press 2, I'm looking at this node, and if I press 3, I'm looking at this node. So 1, 2, 3. So you can see what this merge node is doing is it's taking this image, and it's adding them together. That's what the over operation is, and that's the default. And a lot of times that's what you're going to be doing is you're going to be doing an over. If you're just combining images, you just do an over operation. If you hover over this, if you look down at where it says over, you can see it's just adding the A input to the B input, and there's like a little lowercase a that stands for mask. So if there's a little mask doodad right here. So if we wanted to mask off an area and not combine it together, you can do that. But anyways, so if you're again familiar with Photoshop or Substance Painter, you're also probably familiar with blending nodes, or Premiere, After Effects, same concept, is essentially a way to combine the images together. So in here, if you wanted to do anything like you would do in Photoshop or Substance Painter or Premiere, right, of combining images but not just laying them on top of each other, you might want to darken an image or lighten an image with like some kind of color. You could use those, like if you wanted to darken something with multiply, or you wanted to lighten something with screen, you could do that. So anyways, that's the basic premise. And so we would combine them together to eventually get this. So so you guys don't have to watch me do that, we're going to come over here because I've already done that. So I've got my fill light, I've got my fire environment light, I got the hand fill lights, we got the sun, we got smoke, and I just renamed those. So I'm double clicking on them, and then I'm just renaming them up here. These little guys right here, these are, so I don't know all the technical terms, I wish I did, but if you hold control on your keyboard, you can get these little golden doohickeys, and when you click on them, it drops in this kind of like redirect node. And this is it's just purely visual. It has no effect on anything, right? It's not going to like hurt anything. It's just so it lets you organize your node network to make it look prettier, make it easier to understand, right? Because if you just attach everything without cleaning it up, after a while, if your file gets big enough, you're going to get really confused. So normally it would be something like we'd have a bunch of like these nodes coming out like that. And that's fine, right? But I felt like it looked kind of ugly, right? So I just did it this way, just for fun. Okay, so just like we did over here where we combine those images together, I'm going to disable these for a second. I combined all of those light groups together to give me essentially my beauty. So here's all those images together here. I'm going to bring that viewer, I'm going to bring the viewer, we don't have to look at it necessarily anymore. I'm going to bring the viewer all the way down to the bottom of the scene. Just because, we want to think of all of our information coming from the top, right? That's our input, and it goes through from the top down all these different operations until it gets to the final image, which is at the very bottom. So that's how we're going to think about this node network stuff. Okay, so here's me combining all those light groups together, and then here is my beauty layer. So you can see I'm swapping back and forth between beauty layer. Here, we'll bring it over here. So here's my beauty layer. And then here is my this merge node that's combining all these images together. You can see you can have multiple inputs into a single merge node. You don't have to have a bunch of merge nodes. And you can see it's just adding them all together, all those different light groups, right? So this one's 1 and this one's 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. You can see it looks exactly the same. So if you do your light groups up correctly and you do this node network setup correctly, then this turns out looking great. So why do we want to even do this in the first place? Why don't we just use our beauty layer? So the nice thing about this is that I can actually control my lights now inside of RenderMan or Nuke as if I was in RenderMan and I was on the lights on and off, and I don't have to re-render, right? So in this case, we have this hand fill right here, and in my personal opinion, so don't take any of the things I'm going to do in here as design notes that you should do for your own images, right? I'm just using these as examples. I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the best lighting or image look is. So let's go ahead and just make that a little bit smaller. So over here, I have these nodes here. I'm going to undisable them. So you can see I'm making some pretty big and drastic changes to that image, right? And I'll make these nodes again so you can see them. But by doing this, I can actually, so here's the sunlight, and here's a color correct I made on it, which made it a higher contrast. Here's that hand fill light pass, and here it is with me changing the color and also changing the light, the intensity of the light. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and I'll keep that hue shift one on there because I don't want to goof around with that one too much. But anyways, I'll delete these nodes for now. So let's go ahead and take a look at this again. I'll just disable this for a second. So just to let you know, pressing D on your keyboard is how you disable a node. So you can see if I disable any of these light layers or light group layers, you can see it removes that light from the scene. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to take this hand fill light. So this is this one right here, and I'm going to go ahead and boost it up a little bit. So if you want to just adjust values, like if you're using a levels node in Photoshop, Substance Painter, After Effects, Premiere, whatever. If you ever use a levels node, levels adjustment, it's changing the values in your scene. So it can make the image darker, brighter, change essentially how most of your pixels are closer to black or closer to light to increase contrast or lower contrast, etc. So anything that's having to do with light value inside of an image, you want to use a grade node. So we're going to go ahead and add a grade node. And so we have this grade node right here, and we have several different settings to it. Just to let you know that the black point and white point are going to be the input values. So if you change those, for instance, if I bring the black point up and then bring the white point down, usually what it does is, we can just look at this. Usually what it does is just increases contrast, but in this case I don't want to mess with the white point and black point, so I'm just going to leave those as the default 1, 0. Gain is going to essentially be our way of boosting the value or the light in a way that's essentially taking the middle values and pushing them up or down to be brighter or darker without changing our value range, in the sense that black and white aren't going to change. So I know that's very abstract. I don't want to get into it just because for the sake of this video I want this to be fairly short. So if I bring the gain up, you can see it boosts the image. If I bring the gain down, you can see it darkens the image. So gain is usually what we're using to make our image brighter or darker. Okay. So I come back over here. I'm going to press 1 to look at the merge node, and I'm just going to press D to disable that grade node so we can see what it's doing. Okay, I'm going to uncheck this one, this hue shift, but we'll worry about that one later. Actually, let's go ahead and talk about it now. So I'm using this hue shift node. Let's go ahead and add this down. So if you select a node and then press tab to bring up the node browser, and I'm going to do hue, so we're going to do hue shift, right? It automatically connects it in the chain downstream. So this is going downstream, right? It's going from top to bottom. So if you select a node, it's going to put a node in between the currently selected node and the node it's connected to. So you see it connected here. So hue shift. So hue shift in this one, it's just a way to shift an HSL hue adjustment. So I'm going to go ahead and do hue rotation. So I'm just going to shift it a little red just because I had this kind of teal blue color that's coming from that light source. And in this case, again, These aren't design notes, these are just things I'm randomly doing. I just want it to be a little bit warmer instead. So I just push that light color to be a little bit warmer. Okay, cool. So let's move on. So down here, we're going to have another merge node. So let's go ahead and look at this one. And you can see what this one's doing, so we're just going to disable it so we can see it, is it's increasing that firelight, and it's kind of giving it like a glow effect. You can see it gets a little fuzzy, and I can turn this mix up. You can see it's like this fuzzy brightening effect. I've turned it down. And it's only happening up here, right? It's not happening down here. And so that's what the merge node's doing. So let's look at what I'm doing in the other areas to make this image happen, right? Because we're adding new information. We're not just adding one of our images to it, we're adding it in a way that's not done in our render, right? So over here, what I did was I took my fire environment light, and you can see this fire environment light is going over to my merge node. That's the one that's combining all my images together. But I'm also duplicating it down here, essentially, because I'm also letting it come out down here and combine down here. So I took that fire environment, and I took that image right there, and then I went ahead and brightened it down here. And then I used a blur node, right, which is just blurring, and I just blurred the image out a little bit. And then what I did was, we'll go ahead and disable this mask for a second. And then what I did was I went ahead and added it onto this image, right? So I'm just using another merge node to add that information back onto it. In this case, it's so hard to see, but you can see I'm getting like light over here and over here. I didn't really want that. I only wanted the light to be like concentrated on this opening. So I used what's called a mask. So you could use almost anything as a mask. You can use black and white images, you can use crypto mats, but I'm using the in-house, like the most common mask thing you would make, which is called a roto. So a roto is essentially a hand-drawn mask. So we go ahead and you can see when I undisable it, so I enable it, that's the word for that. You can see I'm like masking it off so it doesn't happen up here, right? But it still happens over here. Okay. So in order to work with the roto, we're going to go ahead and remake that roto. I'm going to delete it. I'm going to press tab to bring up the node browser and type in roto. Okay. And by default, the roto node is going to be using like a pin tool. So it lets you draw using like a curve pin tool, a custom mask. And if you click on the first point, then it completes that mask. And you can see you can click and drag it around. And all the controls over here for it are right there. So if you want to draw out new curves, you click on that. If you want to move and select the curve points and move and adjust them, right? Like if I want to move it there, I want to go ahead and grab that handle to extend it out. I can do that. You can click and drag and move the whole image around, and then I could also delete it by selecting it and pressing delete. Let's go ahead and see what this is actually giving me. So I'm going to go ahead and look at this node. So if you look at this node, you can see it actually doesn't have color information. You might have noticed this so far, but just like red, green, blue, alpha, right? You know, we have RGBA values here, red, green, blue, alpha, right? We also have on these nodes, it shows what kind of information is coming out of them, right? So this one has red, green, blue, and alpha information, right? This one over here, you can see doesn't have any color information. It has only alpha information, right? And if I click and drag over here, you can see that, you know, if I click and drag outside that mask, there's no alpha. And I click and drag inside the mask, there is alpha. And if I look at this, if I look at the alpha channel, I can see that's what that looks like, right? It's just feeding it into a red channel instead. Okay, cool. So that's creating an alpha mask. So if I come back over here and I go ahead and plug this into the mask input right here, it goes ahead and masks that node out, so it only happens within this node right here. And if you want to hide this like overlay, right, because you just want to look at the image, you can usually just close the node and any like doohickeys or overlay stuff that's inside the viewport will go away. Another thing you can do, if you want that to still be active, but you don't want to see it inside the viewport, is you can press the Q on your keyboard, and that turns off overlays. So just remember, if you don't see your overlays, press Q on your keyboard to bring them back. So that way, I still have the node here, but I don't see the overlay information that it has on the image. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a slightly different way. So we're going to delete that. And so for this roto, let's go ahead and just enable that. On here, I'm going to click on this curve drawer thingy, and I'm going to switch over to an ellipse. So this is just going to drag out. I usually do ellipses a lot, and so this is just going to draw out like a circular curve. Okay. And if I go ahead and press Q, you can see I have this sharp fall off. So that's not great, right? It is great that it's like masking off this area over here, so I'm not affecting and boosting these areas over here, and I am affecting this area, but it has this very noticeable fake fall off right here. So I need that to be softer, right? I need like a smooth transition. So on this roto node, let's press Q to bring it back. You can do two things. One, you can come over here and just increase the feather. So if I go ahead and press Q so you can see this, right? If I increase the feather, right, you can see it gets like this kind of soft gradient transition, and I might do like a negative feather. Another thing you could do is, let's go ahead and bring Q in. I'm going to make this smaller just so you can see this. So we're going to select this, make it smaller right here. We're just going to take a look at it here. So you can actually do custom feathering. So on this side, if you select this node and you click on drag on this little line right here, you can actually feather just this side and not feather that side. So let's go ahead and drag this one over. I'm just exaggerating this so we can see it. So if I press Q, you can see on the left-hand side, it's not feathered, but on the right-hand side, it is feathered, right? It starts to get soft. Over here, it gets sharp, right? Cool. So I'll just Control-Z that back. All right. So I just dropped this ellipse here, and I'm just going to go ahead and do a negative feather. So that's just going to soften and blur it into here. And so we can close that roto node. And so now I have that kind of extra little glow punch created right there for me. Cool. All right. So, and the next thing I did was I wanted to change the color of the glove. So I'm going to go ahead and press 1 on this node, right? So this is the next step. So I did a hue shift on it, which we've already seen what a hue shift does. But you can see I also have a mask on this one, right? If I let that hue shift affect the whole image, it'd look really, really weird. I just want this glove to change color. So I'm going to go ahead and I made it a mask. So this is using a different technique. This is using an actual image created by RenderMan. It's called a crypto matte. Crypto matte, if I go ahead and, so here it is, there's like, you'll have a node, it'll output something called cryptomatte.exr for your frame. And this number represents the image frame in your, that this applies to inside your animation. So this is, all these have been frame 137, right? If I look at all of these, it's going to be frame 137. So I just got a single image, right? So this is crypto matte. If I look at it, by default, you can't see anything. It's a very complex image. So in order to actually look at and use this, you have to use what's called a crypto matte node. And so that already exists inside of Nuke. Just go in here and type in crypt, and then you go ahead and you get this crypto matte. And so crypto matte, it uses what's called matte IDs or matte images. And so matte images are essentially masks. And so what crypto matte does in RenderMan and does in other areas that have crypto mattes is it assigns each object a unique color. So each object in this scene has a unique color, a constant color, that's going to make it easy for you to color pick and mask it out, just that object. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and let's clear this out. I'm going to go ahead and double click on this crypto matte node, and I'm going to clear it out. So if I preview this, I'm pressing 1 on my keyboard to look at this. This is what I'm looking at. And you can see here, the matte list, essentially the things that I'm masking out are using a color picker. So it's going to picker add and picker remove. So I'm going to go ahead and hold Control, right? That's my color picker. And I'm going to go ahead and left click something. So if I left click this glove right here, you can see it highlights a bright yellow. You can see that object is added in here, right? Mitten Hairgen. So that's probably the name of that object inside of RenderMan, right? If I do Control click on that wall, right? That wall says it's a back wall right? So it's the name that it has inside of Maya RenderMan. So I'll remove that one. So we'll just go click picker remove, and I'll hold Control and click on it. All right. And so let's go ahead and so we're looking at this node right here in the RGBA. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like in alpha. So you can see it's creating an alpha mask of what I had color picked in that crypto matte. So we'll go back to RGBA. Cool. And so I'm just feeding that alpha mask into this node. So that's letting me select and adjust only the glove with that hue shift. Cool. All right. So I'm going to come over here, and here we go ahead, and I'm going kind of funky, and just so I can show you some stuff, right? So this is just like I'm like really cranking the background, right, and not the foreground, just for fun. I just was doing brightening it and adding some saturation into it. So in order to highlight just that background information, not the foreground information, and there's a smooth transition, I'm using a Z-depth pass. So let's go ahead and look at this. We haven't used this one. We used light groups, and we looked at our beauty layer, and we looked at the crypto mat. We haven't looked at this AOVs list. Instead of going through here and looking at each of these individually, I'm going to pack them all out into one image, just so we can preview it. So I'm going to go ahead and press tab and type in contact layer. So layer contact sheet, right there. I'm going to connect that one and look at this one. And so the layer contact sheet, what it does is it takes all the images packed inside of an EXR, and it's going to put them all out for you so you can see what they look like. And if you want to have a name attached to them, we can go ahead and come up here and show layer name. And so you can see here, I have inside this AOVs file a depth pass, a albedo pass, which is like the surface color, ignoring lighting information. Here's our direct diffuse response, direct specular, indirect diffuse, indirect specular, and then our subsurface. So we don't have to worry about those right now. But you can see I have all these different images in here. And in this case, I'm doing a little trick where, and so we can delete that layer contact sheet. We're just doing that just to see what's inside this image. So I'm using the shuffle node right here to go ahead, and let's double click on it, to grab that depth pass that's stored in here and bring it into color, right? So you can see I brought that Z depth pass. It's called a Z pass or Z depth pass. And I'm taking that and I'm plugging into the red, green, blue, alpha channels. So I'm just taking that information and putting it in there. So that was the one. Oh, let's go ahead and look at that contact sheet. I didn't explain what the Z depth pass is. So the Z depth pass is essentially a render pass that gives you information, color information or alpha information based on how far away something is from the camera, right? If I hold control and left click on this image, you can see that it's telling me, oh, let's go ahead and undo that. So it's control Z that. You can see right here, I'm actually, let's control Z do that. Oh gosh. Delete that, can I do that? Okay, cool. I'm gonna go ahead and turn that off because I was also adding stuff to the color map, or the crypto map. So let's undo that. Okay, cool. We'll come back over here. Look at our GVA. Cool. So this is showing a value based on how far away it is from the camera. So if I hold control and color pick, you can see this is giving me a distance value of an object in the scene and how far away it is from the camera. So that's what's called a depth or Z depth pass. So if you ever see Z or depth, that's what that represents. Cool. All right. So I'm taking that image out. And by default, let's look at it right here. It's really hard to see, right? And you'll see like almost nothing is showing up, right? I can see the glove, right, because it's coming down into like the previewable information. But that's pretty much the reason why I can't see anything is everything is going past my maximum white value. So because they're distance values, they're not supposed to be pixel values, they're distance values, right? Like some of them will go up to like 164, right? And the max for white generally is 1. And in this case, because I'm using ACES, I can go a little past 1, and I still see it. So in order to get that to be within a color range, a 0 to 1 color range, because I'm going to use it as a mask, and masks go from 0 to 1, right? 0 means no mask, and 1 means full mask. What I did is I used a grade node. So we're going to look at this. So on the grade node, we can set the minimum and maximum value. So the black value and the white value, and it's going to remap that to 0 to 1. So this is essentially telling this grade node, hey, black in this image is a value of 2, and white in this image is a value of 75 or 168. Like if we do 120, right, we can see we get a little bit more information back there. Let's do 100. I think I got like 160 at one point. So because that's starting to get the volume fog in the background. Cool. Let's go a little bit higher. Let's do 190. Okay. All right, so that's that grade node. And so that grade node is just taking this information and making it in a 0 to 1 black to white range. And so what I was doing with this is using that for was I was essentially applying it to this color correct node right here. And on this color correct node, all I'm doing is boosting the value, right? So I'm boosting the brightness of this image, so I'm going brighter. And I'm also increasing the saturation, so I'm just pushing a little color in there. So, and the reason why it's not affecting foreground is because I'm using this depth image as a mask. So you can see, because this is black, and it means that that's not going to be affected, this glove isn't going to be affected by this color correct. And this isn't going to be affected that much. And the teddy bear is going to be affected, but not quite so much, and the back wall is going to be fully affected, right? So when I look at this, right, that checks out, right? So it's really affecting the back wall, affecting the teddy bear a little bit, and it's not affecting the glove, like hardly at all. Okay. I'm going to come up here because I kind of skipped over something, but I'm going to talk about this right here. So we have this part right here where I punched this to add like a little of that extra glow by just adding that on top of each other. And I actually use this mix value. So I'm going to bring this all the way up to 1. So when you have a merge node, or any node pretty much, it's going to be kind of like in Photoshop. It has an opacity slider. So it's essentially saying it's turning on and off this operation. So it's doing this merge operation, and if I press D on my keyboard, it disables it, sets this operation to 0. The operation doesn't happen, right? But you can also kind of dial it down. So you can, any node that has a mix node, you can kind of dial down the effect from 0 to 1 here. So in this case, I kind of dialed it down so the effect was not quite as intense. So I could do that same thing down here, right? So if I felt like, I could just dial these values down, but I could also come over and usually sometimes it's in another tab on your node, right? So in this case, it's in the ranges area right here. And I'm going to go ahead and bring that mix down so it's maybe not as intense. Okay. And by default, actually, your node isn't going to work if you did exactly the same thing I did, right? So if I come over here to, which one am I on? It's this one, right, cool. So even though I have this mask attached, it's not actually working. And that's because by default, when I'm using the shuffle node, I'm pulling everything out and I'm grading it as color information. So it's all coming out as color information. But a mask is almost always, by default, looking at the alpha channel, right? It's trying to figure out what your alpha is. So if I come over here and I look, that's just my RGB, but let's see what my alpha looks like. My alpha doesn't have really any good information in it. So I want to use that RGB information as my mask instead. So I'm going to come over here, and if you go over to wherever the mix is, you can see my mask, and it's calling the alpha channel of my mask, right? So my mask is coming in, and it's grabbing the alpha channel. I'm going to switch it over to red, right? Or blue or green, right? It doesn't matter, because in this right here, this black and white image, red, green, blue are the same values. Okay. All right. So the other thing I did was I just darkened the foreground. So you can see if I view this one, you can see I just darkened the foreground. Is way too much, but again, I just kind of wanted to just show that effect, right? You can see it's just darkening it right here. And I'm using a ramp node. So, and I'm plugging that into the mask. So same thing, I just tab, did ramp. There's also, I think, a radial, which is like a circular ramp. And let's go ahead and use that one instead, right? So let's take a look at that one. You'll see it's not the same image or size as my image, right? So I can take that radial and I can go over to its area. Okay, I would probably just reformat it. There's probably a smarter way to do it, but I'm going to reformat it to be the size. Let's go ahead and look at this reformat node. We're going to go ahead and set it to the same size as my scene. Okay, so that should work. 2 formats. Okay, anyways, I'm doing something wrong and I'm forgetting something in the interest of time. We're going to just keep going. I wanted to just resize it, but we could also, what I could have done was, let's just Control-Z that back for a second. I can just select this, and then I can just select these points, and then I can resize them. So I'm going to go ahead and hold, what did I just do? I fixed whatever that was. I don't know. I'm not going to figure it out right now. All right, so I can come in here to, that ramp or that radial. We can just double click it, select it, and you can, move and change and scale it however you want to. So anyways, so I use that as a mask. Let's go ahead and close this out of the properties panel. And I'm just going to use that as a mask. So let's go here, drag that over as a mask. So now it's on, this node is only affecting this foreground area where I have that ramp. Okay. And then I had a little bit of a vignette here. So in this case, I did another grade node, and it's very subtle, but you can see it right here, right? It's darkening the edges, right? And this is what's called the vignette, which is something you would get on real lenses, so real camera lenses. You would have like a little bit of edge, or like light having a hard time getting, kind of getting into the edges of the frame of where it's exposing the film. Just due to like imperfections of the physical hardware. And so in this case, I'm doing that. I'm just grading it down where I'm just darkening the corners. And so with this one, on the actual node, I'm just pulling the gain down. And my roto, so let's take a look at this roto, is I have this ellipse, right? But if I look at this alpha, we expect the inside of the ellipse to be red. If I look at this alpha, you can see the outside of the ellipse, and I have this feather here, is red, right? And that's because I clicked on this little button right here, which is inverse. So you can actually inverse your mask like that. So I'll invert that, and then I was using feathering. So I feathered it. It wasn't strong enough, so I actually just typed in 3000, right? And then I got this really big kind of blur, this really big, nice, blurry soft feather. And I can go ahead and maybe just shift. When I start clicking, dragging, hold shift, that's what I was trying to do earlier. I can do a essentially a equal on all corners scale at the same time. So we'll just go ahead and maybe I'll pull that in a little bit. I wouldn't do that, but that's okay. Let's set that back to RGBA. So we'll go and look at this. We'll go and hide the roto. All right, let's come down here. What am I doing down here? Let's see. I'm not actually sure. Oh, okay. No, I remember what I'm doing. Sorry. So down here, I'm going ahead and I'm going to use what's called in compositing 2D depth of field. So Z depth, Z defocus, camera blur. I'm throwing out a lot of words, and I'm not sure which ones are the correct ones right now, to be honest. But essentially, we're using camera defocus. So camera defocus is also called depth of field. It's the effect of when you have a certain focus subject in your image, right? Like your camera, your lenses are set in a way that a certain depth in your scene is in focus, and then other things that are not on the same plane as it, away from the camera, go out of focus, right? They get blurrier, right? So you can see this glove is out of focus right now, and the teddy bear is in focus. So that's called camera defocus. So whenever you see something called defocus, that's usually what that means. And this is a Z defocus because it's using my Z depth pass, right? That image that I have, if we look at that Z depth pass, and it's using that to determine this node to determine what's in focus. So if I double click on this node, and let's go ahead and look at it, if I hold the, let's press Q, you can see there's a focal point. So I actually can animate and change my focus subject inside of Nuke. So I come over here and you can see now the teddy bear is out of focus and this is sharp and in focus, right? So you could actually keyframe by, you can right click, let's see, focal point right here. I think I can right click and set a key. And so I'm not going to go over animation and keyframing and stuff like that in Nuke, but you can actually keyframe it so it goes, you do a rack focus from that to the teddy bear, right? So you can change it. So this is using like a fake kind of depth of field, which is really cool. It's great because it saves me time in the sense that if I can animate and get my depth of field targets perfect inside of Nuke, but without having to re-render. But the problem is that it's a less accurate and a little less natural feeling than is if you just rendered depth of field inside your camera itself. If you do use the Z defocus camera, the first thing is you're going to have to make sure you have a depth Z channel, right? And you want to change the math. By default, I think it's set to like far equals 0. And the depth of field kind of looks bad when you do that, so we're just going to change it to depth, right? So that looks a lot more accurate and better. So just keep that in mind. So for this channel right here, if you're like kind of combining all these images and you're making, I call this an image stream, right? So we have this image stream. Let's go ahead and clear these out. We have this image stream, right, which is all these image operations adding together, and we're getting a bunch of different channels and data coming out. And so I'm going to go ahead and select this node, and let's go and do a contact sheet. So we'll do a layer contact sheet. We'll select that image, and let's go ahead and look at this one. So in this layer contact sheet, let's go ahead and show layer names. It has my red, green, blue, alpha. It also has those light groups, and that's it. It doesn't have that z-depth pass, right? I have that AOV, and I'm using that z-depth pass, but it doesn't have a z-depth pass inside this image stream, like where my data coming out of here. So all my image data coming down into the ZD-Focus doesn't have a z-depth pass, so the ZD-Focus node cannot do the depth of field correctly without that. So what I did was I used what's called essentially a shuffle copy or a shuffle add. So the shuffle node not only lets us take like an image that's inside our file and put it out into red, green, blue, alpha, we can also take any information and put it into a different channel. So in this case, I have two inputs. I have this one right here, which is my AOVs, so AOV. So that's one that has my depth pass, right? So if I look at that contact sheet for this one, right, we can see we have that depth pass stored inside this image. So I'm taking that's my A input, and then B input is like my all the color work I've been doing so far. And so I want that color and alpha work stuff to keep going into red, green, blue, alpha, but I want to add the depth pass from this node, into my image stream. So I want this to be in the outputs depth pass. So you can see I took the depth pass, so I can bring any of the like other the other AOVs that were stored in here. But I'm grabbing the depth and I'm going to plug it into now I have in the depth channel for my image stream z-depth information. So that's what enabled this node to work correctly. And then finally, what we do if we want to get our image out is we want to use a write node. So a write node is going to essentially render all of your work out from here out as images. My recommendation is if you're going to bring it into After Effects or Premiere, to export out an image sequence. The reason why is because an image sequence is going to be a lot less, it's going to be a lot of data, right? Like you have let's say like 900 images for your whole animation, but it's going to have essentially very little compression, right? So it's just going to have whatever image file format is. It's not going to have very much compression. It's going to be pretty high quality, right? If you export out a video, it's going to compress it down. So we're eventually going to have to make it a video, but if we compress it down as a video here, and then we go into After Effects or Premiere, and we do something in there like add credits or drop in some like 2D art or something like that, we're going to export it down again as another video. So you're going to double compress your image, right? You're going to compress it once, leaving Nuke, and you're going to compress it again when you export it out of Premiere or After Effects. So we don't want to do that. So I would recommend if you guys are doing this approach, if you're going to like just want to take this out of Nuke and show somebody, go ahead and export it out as like a movie file or something like that, like a .mov file. But in this case, I would do a TIFF, right? And what we would do is we would change the file name. So we're going to go ahead and put it here, and we're going to call it image, and then we're going to do dots, and then you could do pound signs like that for an image sequence. And then .tiff. And so if I click save, and then I go ahead and click render, it's going to go ahead and render that out. And so you would do your frame range. I only have one frame range. Say OK. And then that should write out that image to, I think I put it in my downloads. Image, I have a different image. There we go. Image.tiff. Let's open that with photos. And I have a color correction issue here, so I have to color correct this out. So because I'm rendering and viewing in ACES, so we're going to have to go ahead and output transform right here. We're going to go to ACES CG, output color picking. Let's try that one. So we're going to go ahead and render. Okay. Let's go back out. Take a look at that. And there we go. Should look pretty close. We might have to make some adjustments or double check our color space stuff, but that's looks fairly accurate to what I'm seeing in here. So we just had to adjust that color space so that it knows, oh, okay, you're outputting images that are going to be viewed. You could do that color adjustment instead inside of After Effects or Premiere, right? And you don't have to export it as a TIFF. You could export it out as a EXR, I'm pretty sure. I hope you can. I might be wrong. Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. So you can bring all those channels still if you want to use those channels somewhere else. But anyways, that's the gist of Nuke, Photoshop. The one last thing I'm going to say is you can use what's called a backdrop node. Backdrop node is a great way of kind of visually grouping nodes, right? So you can select that. So let's go ahead and scale it. Cool thing is I can select this backdrop node, and you can see I can move a bunch of nodes together at the same time. Cool. And then I can also put a label on it. So we're going to call this one light groups. And then you can do, I don't know if you could do formatting. It'd be great if you could do formatting, but you can change the, oh, okay, cool. You can change the color of it, right? So we can set it to be like, I think this has this, so this is the text color. Is it this color? Yeah, okay, cool. Is this one right here? And then that little orange color at the, I don't know what this one is actually, to be completely honest. It might be like the select edge border color. I don't know. But anyways, so that's that. We're going to close that. Yeah, I think that's the select. Okay, I don't know. And yeah, that is Nuke in a really quick nutshell. Hope this video helps.